Today we're going to start studying viruses. Viruses are not living things, so it's kind of weird that we have to talk about them in biology class, but viruses affect living things, so we have to talk about them. So viruses are not alive. Viruses are not cells. Viruses are particles. They're not alive because they don't share those characteristics of life, that list of 7 things that we've been studying, that checklist of whether something is alive or not. Well, viruses don't have that entire checklist. For example, they do not take in and use energy. They are not able to reproduce on their own. They don't grow or develop. Okay, so for these reasons, viruses are not alive. They are particles. Viruses only contain 2 things. They only have 2 parts. They do have a nucleic acid, which is a biomolecule. Remember that nucleic acids are made of nucleotides, and that there are only 2 in existence, DNA and RNA. Some viruses have DNA, some viruses have RNA. Their other part is protein, another biomolecule. Remember that proteins are made of amino acids. And that's it. That's all they have. They have a nucleic acid, which is protected on the inside, and then they have a protein coat or an outer shell made of protein to protect the nucleic acid. That's it. They don't have anything else. They don't have any cellular machinery. So they don't have ribosomes. They don't have cytoplasm. They don't have a nucleus. They don't have any of those organelles that we were talking about because they are not cells and they are not alive. So viruses cannot reproduce on their own. One virus cannot make more viruses. They have to hijack a living cell, and then they force the cell to make more viruses. So you can see in this little video that's playing here on the side, so the viruses are these funny little alien looking things on the outside. First, they have to find a cell and attach to it. Then they inject their nucleic acid into the cell. That nucleic acid makes its way to the nucleus of the cell and takes over. It destroys the host cell's DNA and then takes over all the cell's cellular machinery, forcing it to make more viruses. And then the viruses assemble, and it just keeps making more and more viruses until the cell bursts open and dies. So these are the simplified steps of viral infection. So step 1, the virus has to find and attach to a cell. It injects its own personal genetic material into the cell. Step 2, the viral genetic material has to make its way over to the host cell's DNA, rips it apart, okay, rips apart the host cell's DNA so that its DNA can take over. And now it takes over everything that that cell is doing. It takes over the ribosomes and starts making its own pieces. And then those pieces start to self-assemble until there are so many little virus particles that were made that the cell bursts open and dies. A cell bursting open and dying is also known as lysing. Okay, remember that word from our prefix-suffix list, lyse, which means to loosen or to take apart. And so that is the cell bursting open. So how do viruses travel from place to place. Viruses travel through what's called a vector. Okay, so you've probably heard this word before in a math class, so it's a little bit different of a definition in science class. A vector is the way that a virus is able to travel. Okay, so I'll go over some examples of virus vectors. Make sure that you can give some examples too. So one way that viruses travel is by being airborne. If they're very light or they have something on their outsides that make them able to float in the air, then they can be airborne. One virus that is a well-known airborne virus is the common cold. Whenever you have the common cold, you are infected with millions and billions of little viral particles. That's what's making you sick. And every time that you cough or you sneeze and you don't cover up your mouth, those viruses inside of you are bursting out and they're floating in the air. So then when someone walks into the same air that you were in after you sneeze, they can breathe in your viruses and then they can get sick. Another way that viruses can travel is by contaminated food or water. That's why they say it's important for you to always boil your water in third world countries to try to make those viral particles fall apart. Because remember, it's a protein coat. So if they get hot enough, their proteins will denature, and so they will no longer be able to infect you. Infected animal bites is another way that virus vectors can travel. The avian flu through birds. Rabies is a virus that travels through infected mammal bites. And interesting fun fact, one mammal that rarely ever gets rabies is the possum. So if you get bitten by a possum, there's a 99.9% chance you don't have to worry about rabies. There's also the West Nile virus that travels through mosquito bites. And another viral vector is sexual contact. All sorts of STDs are viruses, such as herpes and AIDS and hepatitis. All of these get transferred through sexual contact and the exchange of bodily fluids. Also, contaminated blood products or needles. So sharing needles, big no-no, but also just coming into contact with somebody else's blood. If you have a cut and it gets into your bloodstream, you can get any blood-borne disease that they may have, such as hepatitis and AIDS. The most important thing to remember about viruses is that viruses cannot be treated with antibiotics. So if you're sick and you go to the doctor and you're like, give me some antibiotics so I can feel better, a good doctor is not just going to hand over some antibiotics. He's going to do a test first. He's going to maybe swab your throat, maybe take a blood sample, and test to see if you have a bacterial infection or a viral infection. Virus infections, antibiotics don't do anything to viruses, absolutely nothing. So it's a waste of time and it's actually dangerous because using antibiotics when you don't need them is leading to antibiotic resistant bacterial strains such as MRSA. Okay? Antibiotics work because when you have a bacterial infection, bacteria have a cell wall. And antibiotics work at destroying that cell wall, so killing the bacteria in your body. Viruses don't have a cell wall, so antibiotics do not work on viruses. Now, we have created some antiviral drugs. You've heard about people who have AIDS taking antiretrovirals, which can help slow down virus's reproduction cycle, so can lower viral loads that way. But viruses, they mutate and they evolve very quickly, and so they're constantly changing. And so it's really hard for doctors and for people with viral infections, because usually the antiviral drugs will work for a while, but then the virus will mutate and it will no longer work. And so then they have to get on a new antiviral drug regimen. So we're always having to constantly invent new ones and try to keep up with them. So if you get sick with a viral infection, the best thing to do is just get lots of rest, drink lots of water, take lots of vitamins, and just let your immune system do its job and fight off the infection. That's really all you can do, is relax and let your body do its thing, because antibiotics don't work on viruses.